Welcome, idiot viewers. Okay, so this week we discuss many topics. Moloch, Metatron, how the elites conspire to control you and rule the world. It starts off a little bit slow, but bear with us because we do get into the good stuff. We discuss mythology, your mom, many other concepts, game theory, hill climbing, valley crossing, explore versus exploit, hypergraphs, bloody Wolfram model, tie it all together, category theory, all the stuff. It's insane. But stay with us. At the end, we go through the nuggets. Hope you enjoy, like and comment, and enjoy the episode.
Guy, definitely wasn't slow, dude. This is one of the best apps. You're going to love it all the way through.
All right, here we are, ready to go. Polska, how you doing?
Rubes, I am starting from literally ground zero with this Moloch shit. I have no idea what the fuck it is, what you're talking about. So please enlighten me because it sounds interesting and I'd love to learn about it, Guy.
Okay, so well, I think traditionally Moloch has been used as a way of describing certain things, and it's typically described as like a god or a fallen angel or something like that. And it started out as like a god that you would sacrifice your children to, or you would sacrifice children to, in order to win a battle or win a war. Okay, and essentially that was how like Moloch was sort of described to people, a way of conveying this information or this knowledge or this idea or concept. But then if we sort of take it out of that and we like zoom out and use what we know now, we can sort of understand it in a little bit higher definition, I think the term would be. And so essentially what it is it's one way to describe it is it's like a zero-sum game or a win-lose situation where you have to give up something that you care and love about your child or children to get something else that you really want as well, and or something else that you want, and that is win the war or win the battle. And then essentially what this does is it's about these incentives, and it's like a race to the bottom is another way to sort of talk about it. But that's sort of typically how it's described. But now there are other people who have gone over this concept in more modern times, taking what we've sort of learned and know about, and are able to frame this in a different way using game theory, category theory, and a whole bunch of other concepts. But does that sort of base concept kind of make a bit of sense? Sorry.
I'm so glad I decided to get blazed for this episode, Guy. This sounds like a mad blaze topic. Okay, so far I'm following, guys. So far I'm following. Basically, from what it sounds like is that you have to sacrifice integrity in order to stay competitive. Am I on the right track, Guy?
Yeah, mate, I don't know if it's necessarily integrity, but it's kind of like you have to give up something. Well, the way I sort of interpret it is give up something that you care about or is special to you or sacred to you or something like that for some other gain. So it's like you have to make a sacrifice, but sacrifice something that is deeply meaningful or deeply important to you in some way, shape or form.
Like
so
children.
If you want to say there's integrity, go for it. Hey?
Like children, right?
Yeah, that's why I think they used that way of presenting it was that like you have to sacrifice your children or sacrifice these children to win this war or win that battle. And if you did this, if you sacrifice those children, then you would get to win that battle or that war. But it's like, at what cost, if that kind of makes sense? And that kind of summarizes this whole Moloch thing.
So it's a lot worse than integrity, I guess. It's not just only, and if we use like the original example of sacrificing children, and I guess you're sacrificing not just integrity, but something that is most important to you. Is there anything more important to people than their children? I don't think so. So the number one most important thing to you in order to stay competitive or to gain something, right?
Yeah. And also it's like, it also highlights like a really short-term thinking. Okay. So like think about what it means to give up your children or sacrifice your children. It's kind of like you're also sacrificing that next generation, the future, right? For an immediate win. So it's very short-term focused in that regard. And so I think this ties into some topics we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks with this sort of, short-term versus long-term thinking and things like that. So Moloch is kind of like this, ultra short-term game that really is a race to the bottom, but it's like in the moment, it seems like a win. Like, so for those people, it's like, okay, to win, we need to win this war. But the price we pay for that is we sacrifice the future generation. Like we sacrifice our long-term future for this short-term win. It's the sort of thing. There's obviously going to be better ways to do that. And we're butchering it a little bit because we're idiots, obviously. But yeah, we can go into it. So the thing that sort of sparked me off on this was, I read a really interesting Twitter thread about this, and I'm just going to bring it onto a different screen.
So I actually watched some of the video you sent me of Liv Boret on Lex.
Yeah.
So that's where I got...
the Twitter thread and the video. One sec. Twitter thread and the video.
Yeah.
So you go on about the video, and then we'll go on to the Twitter thread.
Okay. I only watched like 3 to 5 minutes, and I'm just repeating what she said in it with the staying competitive part. Like the sacrifice.
Right, let's hear it.
My example that I gave? I got that from her.
Which bit?
Sacrificing integrity in order to stay competitive is what I've got, what she said. And that was, I only got to watch like 3-5 minutes. So like it was the only thing I could gain from that.
Yeah. So I think that's a way to describe it. I don't know if it captures the whole of it.
Yeah.
But it is, it captures a good part of it, right? So, well, we can link to some other content on this as well, but I'll just quickly. So, what was the guy's? One sec, I just got to double check this guy's name. Do you remember his name, guy? Jordan Hall.
Jordan Hall, yeah. I didn't understand what he was really going on about. I do. It makes it a little bit more easy to understand now that I've seen like 5 minutes of Liv, but I'd have to go back to read it. But it was. He's an excellent writer. He just complicates what he's writing. But I guess you have to, because Twitter, you don't have enough like space. So he's trying to be as in as little amount of words.
Uncomplicating.
Uncomplicating?
Yeah, I found it very uncomplicated. I found it very.
I just understand like half the words. I just didn't understand half the words he was using.
Yeah, well, and that's absolutely understandable. Because he was using more of a category theory lens, which could make these things more complicated for certain people. But if you're familiar with the language and you've got a bit of vocabulary, it can be very uncomplicating. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, I'll just share my screen for a second, and we can sort of go over this. This guy Jordan Hall, this is his tweet. So he goes, okay, let's try and explain this on Twitter. Can you imagine? Like, obviously very funny. Moloch is, as I understand it and use the term, points to the category of multipolar traps, tragedies of the commons, coordination failure, races to the bottom, and prisoner's dilemma, etc. It's a large category with all of these sorts of games or situations or systems that have this same sort of dynamic where they, race to the bottom or get stuck in this local global minimum, or any of those like essentially negative outcomes or unintended outcomes. The question is, when is it proper to think of a system as made up of multiple different agents making local choices, or of one larger agent making a global choice? Now, all of this these Moloch style things come about when you have multiple agents in these situations where they're sort of competing over things. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. So far, I'm getting what you're putting down, guy.
Yeah. So it's either like multi-agent games. Okay. So he gives an example. For example, in the marshmallow test, if you model it as two agents, U1 now and U2 in the future, you get a classic Moloch answer. U1 will always choose the local optima of one marshmallow and defect on U2. Okay, so the marshmallow game is a game about, choosing marshmallows, like, will you take one now or will you delay it and then get, more in the future kind of thing. So then he goes on, but if you model it as one agent, U over the whole duration, then you get a different answer. Always wait and get the global optima of two marshmallows. I call this Metatron, in contrast to Moloch. Obviously, the same thing is happening in multicellularity, but this begs the question of how do you get there? If you start at a bottoms-up ontology, the logic of Moloch is pretty clear. Whence Metatron. I thought about it in two ways that I think are connected. One, foundationally, the evolutionary strategies of hill climbing and valley crossing are equally fundamental. Roughly, Moloch maps to hill climbing and Metatron to valley crossing. Think about it. What is valley crossing? It is when you make a locally irrational choice on the hope that maybe there is a global optima where somewhere within your range of agency, but beyond your range of perception. Within the Moloch frame, you can't ever get there. It's game theoretically irrational. How does evolutionary theory account for it? By invoking a larger agent. It's not about the phenotype, it's about the genotype. While valley crossing is irrational from the local perspective of a given organism, from the larger perspective of the genome, having some fraction of organisms be wired to valley cross is a net win. The Moloch frame makes an impossible assumption that there is some perfect boundary around the communication between the agents, i.e., that they are ontologically separate. I suspect that this is simply not real, that connectedness/wholeness is as foundational as distinction. Context is complex, not complicated. The abstractions of game theory are decontextualizing, and they throw out the actual irreducible complexity of reality. If you look at the work of Alicia Juraro, you'll find a fantastic exploration of how this might look from a complexity and self-organization perspective. Hoffman, of course, also explored this space, and if you'd like, old Aristotle's formal cause is of the same cloth. So, Metatron is as fundamental as Moloch. You can pass the marshmallow test whether you know it or not. You are always part of something larger than yourself.
That blew my mind. I actually am understanding more this time. I think the third time was a charm, guy. Especially with the examples that I heard from Liv. I'm actually wrapping my head around it. So I'll let you go ahead because I have some questions about the end, but I'll ask you after.
Okay. So essentially how we were talking about, hard decisions, easy life, easy decisions, hard life, that kind of thing. And so like, if you're in the moment and you're just optimizing for the moment, it typically leads to these bad outcomes. Like long-term, it leads to a harder life. That's the Moloch, right? And then the Metatron is the doing the hard thing in the moment, right? And going towards that easier life. That's a way to think about it. So what I like about what he just said is it's that category theoretic approach to it, which we done originally with the Wolfram model, and we went over like multi-computation and the branching universe and all of these possibilities, and like that whole concept he ties into it as well. And so for me, that sort of really resonated. But the interesting thing as well is, in life, we often think that things are like, good or bad. And then we've been talking about its perspective. It's how you choose to look at it. And what I liked about that was the Moloch framing is like, it's showing you that if you think about things logically and rationally, you can get caught into these traps. And sometimes you have to do this like locally or in the moment, irrational thing, right? For the greater good, so to speak. And that's that Metatron perspective. And that was the valley crossing as opposed to the hill climbing. So hill climbing is like optimizing for the local, like local optimization or finding local optima or trending to, or moving towards local optima, which might be like getting the donut or, sitting on the couch to relax yourself or whatever. That's like the easy thing or the comfortable thing to do. Whereas sometimes you've got to do that valley crossing, which is quite hard and scary and doesn't seem to be as rational. And I love that because we are often taught like, rationalism is this gold standard, and it's necessary, but it isn't the whole story, and it can't get you everywhere you need to get to. Sometimes you have to do these irrational things, which is that valley crossing, right? You don't necessarily know that there's going to be a benefit, right? The environment, the situation is telling you that, no, this thing is what you should do in the moment. And you go against that, but it ends up getting you to somewhere where you otherwise would never get to. That's why I kind of like that. And I'll articulate that a little bit clearer, but yeah. Does that kind of resonate a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. It started making me think about that other video that was shared in our group chat about Chinese students going through this experiment
Yeah.
with the headsets using the AI
Yeah.
to relay messaging, to relay information to the parents and to the teachers about their concentration levels. And I guess the idea was sold to the parents with this sort of promise that this would increase grade scores, which is quite important. Yeah, that's it. That's it. And you could see why that would be attractive to parents. Also, I doubt that they would have much say. Not to talk bad against China, but we kind of all have an understanding of how things are run over there. But I would love to go.
Okay, John Cena.
But I would
Please
love
do
to
an
go
apology
there.
now.
Listen, I would love to go travel to China. I mean, two of the biggest cities in the world are in China: Beijing, Shanghai. Macau seems very interesting. There are the terracotta warriors that I would love to see. Obviously, Summer Palace would be cool. The Great Wall, Tiananmen Square. I mean, I got all of China mapped out where I'd like to go, so I want to go there. But yeah. Anyways, guy, I think I got it that good, right? That's better than an apology.
Yeah, you did. All right, sorry to derail your point, but please continue.
So I was just trying to relay that video back to what we were talking about, right? Because they're trying to essentially optimize humans, optimize. And it might seem logical for what they're trying to achieve, but it's also, I find it very illogical as well. I think what they're doing is not gonna come with like effective results, because if you can just improve grade scores, that's not a very good metric for understanding people's intelligence, their character, their creativity. It actually reduces creativity, right? And I see them sort of taking those mountain steps, not really wanting to go through the valley and develop a nation properly. I think AI should be used to optimize work, not to control and optimize humans.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, it can be used for both.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's a good little segue, and we can get back to the whole Moloch and all the rest of it. But we'll tie it in with this: the Chinese using AI to essentially improve or increase the student's ability to focus. But that's like, again, it's that local optimization. And it's really like that hill climbing. And the crazy thing to realize is that so much innovation doesn't just come from like the focus, it actually comes from the diffuse mode of the brain. And diffuse mode is like free time thinking, or as like colloquially we could call it fucking around. Like daydreaming and fucking around. And that's where like so many of these, like so many breakthroughs or fundamental sort of shifts in the way we think or perceive about things, breakthrough ideas come from, is that sort of diffuse mode, that not focusing on the problem, like thinking, doing some focus, thinking, but then going away and going, like this is so many scientists or physicists or mathematicians have their aha moment when they're walking or taking a bath, or they're not really thinking about the problem. They're sort of fucking around. And so like it's a concern, because it's a very Moloch-y thing to do this, using AI to make sure kids are focusing and to help them to focus more on the rest of it, because you can only get so far with that. And what we really rely on are these paradigm shifting sort of conceptual changes in the way we think or know. Think about things, and the technologies that can come from that paradigm shifting way of thinking about something. And that really happens in the diffuse state. And so, it's a concern in that regard. But the interesting thing then, because you go up another level, right? And you go, okay, well, is China doing this as like sort of a balancing act? Because, other parts of the world are sort of so not focused, right? And so if we zoom out another level and look at it as like a superorganism kind of thing, like, because essentially what I got from the tweet from Jordan was that they both coexist, right? And they both have their place to a degree, right? And so it's understanding that like I would argue like Metatron isn't necessarily better, but it is necessary, and Moloch isn't all bad. There are places where the Molochy stuff, helps us to sort of. Well, actually, I'll frame it this way. There's another way to think about it, I think, or we could tie it to explore versus exploit, right? Like Moloch is the exploiting. We exploit, and then Metatron is the explore. Okay, and I think fundamentally as beings, we're sort of exploratory. We're explorers. But we also need to exploit because we have a biological body that requires energy, nutrition, and certain resources. So we have to exploit those things to a certain degree, right? But then also exploring because that expands our horizon. That kind of makes sense. So if we think about it in that way, exploiting is this race to the bottom. If you just exploit too much, it's a race to the bottom. It's the Moloch. And if you explore, you can discover and expand your space to exploit. And so it's this sort of symbiosis that has to coexist, and it's about finding a balance between the two. And I think that is what, as a society, as life, etc., that's what we've really got to try and find. What is the balance between explore versus exploit, Moloch versus Metatron, etc.
Liv gave this other great analogy, which was if you're at a football game, or what's a popular sport in Australia, Rubes?
Footy, brah. Fucking rugby league and that. So rugby union, footy.
Footy. All right, if you're in a footy stadium.
Sorry. Yeah, but we call football or footy, it's not soccer, right? We call the game that the rest of the world calls football, we refer to that as soccer in Australia. And then, the big game in Australia is footy, but footy could be one of three different things. It could be AFL, Australian Football League, which is where they have like long goalposts and different set of rules, and they wear really nice short shorts and singlets, and they run around and do this whole big thing. And it's like less of a it's still got contact, but it's less intense. Then you've got rugby league, and then you've got rugby union. So I think everyone would know what rugby union is, and then rugby league is like a modification on those rules. But yeah, that's the big sports in Australia.
So imagine you're in a footy stadium and you stand up to get a better view. The person behind you is going to have to stand up, and then eventually the whole stadium is going to be standing. Now we're all back to where we started, except for the people in the very first row. But we're standing, right? So we have the same view again, but we're standing now. And to try and like get everybody to sit down to understand that, if we all just sit down, we'll have a good, comfortable view, is difficult to sort of maneuver.
Correct. Yeah. So another great way to explain it. And so like, that's that race to the bottom, right? Like, there's a local incentive for one person to do it because they want a better view, but then because they take that, then other people are like, well, I want a better view too. And so then everyone stands up. Then all of a sudden that better view is gone because everyone's doing the same thing. And I think, again, we can look at through that explore versus exploit lens and tie it to that, which is like, that's that exploitation. They're exploiting the opportunity that is if everyone's sitting and I stand up, then there's a better view. But then I block someone else's view, causes them to stand up, and it sets off this chain reaction. And it's this, another way to talk about it is the tragedy of the commons, which is like there's an incentive for us to utilize this resource because we can, help develop our, selfishly fill our needs, so to speak, but that's a whole thing about selfishness. Anyway, and then everyone then starts competing, and then all of a sudden the resource is gone, or it destroys that local resource, or it destroys the commons because everyone's competing over it. But yeah, like, do you kind of get that tie-in between the two, and with that explore exploit? Does that makes sort of sense to you with that explore versus exploit framing?
Yeah, definitely. It's starting to make a lot more sense, but now I have more questions. So if we use this analogy that Liv gave about everyone's now standing in the stadium to have that better view, right? I guess that's sort of like an analogy for the world. We've gone to a place where we're all standing, and if something could just show us sort of a clue of how we could all be sitting comfortably watching the game still. But up until it's almost as if like something very powerful would have to intervene in order for us to sort of go back to sitting again. Do you know what I mean? Because the system is so, it's just on this like path of optimization that we're not seeing, we're not going through, we're not choosing to go through the valley. And for us to do that, we would need a big push, right?
Well, maybe, or I don't think it's about, to me, I don't think about it in terms of going back to sitting. I think it's more like, we need someone to go, well, fuck this. I'm fuck the stadium. I'm going to leave and go and do something else. And then everyone's like, oh, they've discovered a new thing that we can go and do with our time. And so then everyone just bounces out of the stadium and goes and does this new thing. And that's the explore. So we need, people to explore. The beautiful thing about life is we do have plenty of people that are exploring. And to me, the exploit thing is the very rational and logical. And then the explore is that irrational and illogical sort of actions. And so it ties into that, China using AI to, optimize their kids' focus and get them to focus on this, logical and this logical thing, which is like more focus equals better. There's good rationale there and there's reasoning behind it from the way they're looking at it, but fundamentally missing the point of like, no, we need that diffuse time. We need that fucking around. We need the lack of focus to do the explore. That's what exploring kind of is in some sense. And it's that doing that irrational, illogical thing.
Okay, you've cleared it all up for me now. I think I'm understanding it now, guy. That's really interesting. That's a really interesting point. Let's not all try and figure out how we can sit back down again, but like, let's go and do something else. I love that.
Yeah, well, that to me, it's like, what you need is the person to be like, this is just stupid. Well, everyone's focusing on the game. And, to everyone sitting there watching the game, the person leaving is doing a very irrational thing. Right? Because like, this is the game. Like, we love watching footy. Like, why would you leave? Like, why? And it's like, so to them, it seems irrational, but hopefully to that person, they're just like, no, this is dumb. Like we're all here just like, blocking each other's view or whatever. So I'm going to go do a completely different thing. And then that's that explore. And so then they go off and they find something else and everyone's like, oh, what's that person doing over there? That looks kind of cool or whatever, or valuable or whatever. And then, so then they start to come over. And I think it's just a constant cycle of this. Like, that's what life is this constant explore, exploit, trade-off, balances and finding. Like, so we discover certain things like, food resources, metal, like, just resources in general. And then we sort of, exploit them to satisfy certain needs. But if we overexploit, we deplete and we run out of them. And so we fucked ourselves. Right. And so it's that, again, balancing the explore versus exploit. And so if we try and optimize all of society along this logical and rational path, that to me is just like going all the way down the exploit. That's what it's going to lead to. Whereas we have to like have and this is, you can see this in certain systems at certain level, across most systems at different levels. There is like, between 10 and 20% that don't do what everyone else does, that goes against the grain, or that does the thing that appears illogical to the rest of the people. And that's kind of like how you balance the trade, like the balance between Metatron and Moloch. But the concern with all of this is with technology is it's very Molochy, right? Because it's all about optimization. And what we have to realize is it's not always about optimization. It's not always about exploiting.
Yeah, finding the limits is really, really difficult. And people, it's not necessarily that people don't want to do it. It just seems to be like this natural path of human behavior to try, because of the competitive nature, right? And there's so many fields and so many ways of making money. And there's so many people that, in order for people to try and sort of stay competitive or at least survive, will do things, will sacrifice their integrity in order to do them. So it's very difficult to not live in a Molochy type society, because like you said, 10 to 20% of people are sort of going against the grain. So it's not really a majority, which I find really interesting, because most of the people that I know are sort of against the grain. Like most of our friends groups, I would say, are against the grain. Would you agree with that, or would you disagree with that?
In certain aspects, I think they each have their against the graininess. But if we zoom out far enough, I'd say largely most of them are pretty, like our mutual friends in that regard. Yeah, I think they each have their unique aspects of going against the grain, but I don't think that you would classify them broadly as like against the grainers. We could go, okay, so let's talk about a taboo subject, which is vaccination and those kinds of things against COVID and stuff. Yeah, bye channel. Luckily, we're not killing much, so it's okay. But okay, so that's why these mandates where everybody should do this thing is fundamentally flawed, because we don't know about the long-term consequences of any of these things. And if we all do this one thing, then we all get into that boat, right? And this is why it's okay to, sort of not. And then you've got people going, well, but it's optimal to make sure that as little people die as possible. We have to make sure that no one can spread this, et cetera, et cetera. There's all of these arguments. But that's a very Moloch-y way of thinking about it, right? And that's assuming that you think you know everything, as opposed and that's based off this local information, as opposed to zooming out and getting the more global. And the global thing can only really be seen over time. And because we haven't had that time yet, then it's silly to jump into that one boat and try and exploit that one thing or utilize that one thing. That kind of it's a bit.
Yeah. I guess because we don't know a lot of people of how they actually make decisions and do things in their private lives, it's hard to make an assessment, because it's one thing when you're talking to a friend or a family member and there's a conversation, especially in a group setting, and you sort of think everyone is on the same page agreeing, or they might just be saying something during that conversation. But when it comes down to actually making a decision, and they start thinking differently, and they'll do whatever they feel is not necessarily convenient to them, but it's beneficial to them, and which they should. Everyone should think about themselves, put themselves, well, not necessarily always first, but they should definitely think about their benefits, right, over others in certain circumstances. That kind of sounds bad to say, but I think there's certain circumstances. Like, for example, voting, left versus right. Go ahead. Yeah. What did you want to say?
Well, what I'm saying is like what you were saying just then made me think like a lot of people talk about it, not many people be about it. Yeah. That's what I really got from what you were just saying is like, yeah, lots of people want to talk like, yeah, this and that or whatever. But when push comes to shove, they typically revert to what most people are doing or what the norm is or whatever. And that's what I'm trying to get across is like the norm is necessary, but it isn't sufficient, right? You have to have people that go against that as well. They're the explorers. They're the ones trying to find other ways. And like, not all of those things will be fruitful, and it isn't guaranteed that your exploration will lead to anything useful, but you still need people to do it. And as long as that's what they would like to do and they're passionate about that and whatever, that's a beautiful thing. That's the exploring. And so what they do is they go and explore and find new things that we can exploit. But we can't just get trapped in exploiting. Getting trapped in exploiting is Moloch. Liv gives another good example with the beauty filters. Right? Like she's like, okay, so, people that get engagement off social media, people that get higher click-through rates or more likes, whatever, typically, have a more beautiful in this objective sense of subjective sense of the word that we've developed as a society. And so now that there are these beauty filters that you can use and you can apply to your pictures that make you more beautiful in very subtle ways. And she's like, so if you don't use that filter, then your photos you don't get as much engagement, you don't get as much attention, you don't get as many followers. So you're incentivized to use the filters. But then by you using that filter, then everyone else uses that filter, and then it's a race to the bottom. Okay? And so that's that exploiting. You're exploiting the fact that there is this technology that does this thing, that makes your face like this, and that people, that appeals to people more, so then they click through, and that's that exploitation. Yeah, so we need people to explore other ways of getting engagement, other ways of getting attention, other than the beauty now. And that's what's going to save us from that the race to the bottom that is Moloch. So Metatron saves Moloch.
Yo, and by the way, fuck Instagram, dude. Such a piece of shit application. Yo, like, if you're still using Instagram, you're wasting your fucking time. It's so stupid. And I find Instagram so fucking stupid, man. Like, it's.
But it is.
I've never had Instagram in my life. Never made an account.
Whoa.
Never.
Guy, I'm mad proud of you.
Never made a Facebook account either. Never. Not once. You can try and look me up, motherfuckers. See if you can find me. Not going to find me.
Honestly, that's wicked. So, yeah, why is Instagram stupid? Like, okay, it isn't just inherently stupid, but there is a large part of it is a trap. Okay? Like, it really is a bit of a race to the bottom in many regards. You can utilize these things, all of these things, you can utilize them for value, for good. So you can use it as an educational tool and things like. So I've used it as an educational tool largely. So I typically try to follow accounts that post content that I found to be very valuable and useful to me and the problems that I was having or trying to solve in my life, or at a greater thing at a business level. So utilize Instagram for business and things like that. So because people do put out content and things, and I wasn't following them just because they're the most beautiful or whatever, I chose to play a slightly different game on there. I was like, okay, who's putting out really good educational content in an easily accessible and digestible way? And so you can utilize it for that. So again, it's not just blindly, sorry, I've burped so many times, but it's just not using it to blindly follow the pretty stuff or get like that dopamine hit from that. Actually utilizing it as an educational tool to develop yourself or to develop your skill sets. But yes, it's largely silly because it is like, it's a highlight reel for people's lives. And unless you're, cognizant or, aware of that and sufficiently self-aware and aware of your own biases and things like that, then it's easy to fall into the trap and it's a race to the bottom then.
I'm loving this Moloch versus, what was the other one? The Explore one?
Metatron.
Yo, Metatron sounds so dope.
Yeah, the Valley Cross.
Yo, I would, like, if someone gave me the choice, Moloch or Metatron, yo, Metatron. Every day. It even sounds better. Yo, like, I want to live a Metatron life, guy. I want a Metatron system.
Yes. So what I'm trying to say is that you need a bit of both in some way, shape or form. If that kind of, you know what I mean? Like, you do need to exploit a bit, but you also need to be willing to explore.
A Metatron-ish
just system. Getting stuck in either one, I think is the bad thing. But again, I think it's always understanding the balance between these things. Think on that for a second, because I've got to do a wee break real quick.
Yeah, for sure, bro.
I hydrated way too much.
I didn't even think about what I was supposed to ask you, guy. I was looking at my phone because I was waiting to see what the result of the Toronto versus Tampa Bay game was. And Toronto won in overtime. Finally, we've won a series. It's been years since we've won a series in the playoffs. So this is a very important moment. Yeah.
Okay. Well, congratulations to Toronto. Shout out.
Difficult being a Leaf fan, dude. It's a lot of sacrifice and suffering, but it's all worth it, right?
How bad is that suffering, guy?
I find sports suffering really hilarious. People get so into it that they get so emotionally involved in sports. And I don't know, I think it's a little bit outrageous, especially football fans. Like, there are literally gangs of people that travel to other cities and fuck each other up just because their teams are playing.
Yeah.
Like, it's unreal, dude.
Yeah, it's bonkers. As a former, like, I still enjoy sports, but I don't watch them like I used to. I used to really get into it. I used to have, my teams and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, then I sort of came to that realization. I was like, oh yeah, this is all just so trivial. Like, it's a bit of a distraction. It's a bit of, it's a whole thing. But yeah, you share the ups and you share the downs with that team. It's like an interesting thing. Interesting how I think we spoke about this before with sports, how like when they sort of came about when wars were less common or battles between factions were less common. And so then we needed a way to apparently we needed a way to sort of keep people engaged and have an outlet for that kind of instinct that we've evolved with, so to speak. And then that's when the gladiators, and then that evolved into other sports and less violent in some aspects. So more longevity to the players or the participants in the sport as opposed to death.
Imagine
it's crazy times.
Imagine being a gladiator though. Imagine actually living that lifestyle. Like, that is so intense.
That's, to me, that's a great example of very high highs and very low lows. Like that valley is a valley you can't come back from. But the high would be insane. It would be amazing, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But again, you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. So I got ChatGPT to give us an idiot's explanation of that whole tweet and a bit of the Moloch Metatron sort of concepts. Do you want me to read through a little bit of that?
Yeah.
Do you want me to share it? Share it as I read it?
Yeah, if you want, whatever. It's always exciting doing something with ChatGPT.
Right? I love it.
I think recently they stopped doing code. I tried to get code for something the other day, and it told me that as an AI model, it's not allowed to write code specifically for Blender, was the response I got. So then I went to the Bing one, and then the Bing did it for me.
That's interesting. It could also be how you write it. That's another way. That's another thing.
That's true. I wasn't using ChatGPT 4, by the way. I was using the free version.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know. I'll double check because I use it to write code all the time, but not specifically for Blender. Okay, so I'm going to screen share this. All right, so we've got explain it to me like I'm an idiot. It's one of my favorite prompts. So it says, Moloch represents situations where different agents, individuals or groups make decisions that seem good for themselves, but lead to bad outcomes for everyone. Examples include pollution, overfishing, and traffic jams. The overfishing one's like a classic tragedy of the commons example. Metatron is the opposite perspective, where you consider the entire system and make decisions that are good for the whole group, even if it might not be the best for you right now. The marshmallow test is used as an example to explain the difference between Moloch and Metatron. In the test, a child can choose to eat one marshmallow immediately or wait and get 2 marshmallows later. If you think of 2 separate agents, you now and you in the future, it's like Moloch. You now will eat the marshmallow and defect on you in the future. But if you think of it as one agent, you over time, you'll wait to get the better outcome of 2 marshmallows. This is like Metatron. The challenge is figuring out how to move from Moloch, local decisions, to Metatron, global decisions. The author suggests 2 ways to think about this. Evolutionary strategies. In nature, there are 2 basic strategies: hill climbing, Moloch, and valley crossing, Metatron. Hill climbing is like making decisions that are good for you right now, while valley crossing involves making choices that might seem bad now, but could lead to a better overall outcome. 2, interconnectedness. The author argues that the idea of completely separate agents is unrealistic and that individuals and groups are connected in complex ways. By recognizing this connectedness, we can move from Moloch to Metatron. In summary, Moloch is about making decisions that seem good for you right now, but might be bad for everyone, while Metatron is about making decisions that consider the well-being of the whole system. To move from Moloch to Metatron, we need to understand that we are all interconnected, and sometimes we need to make choices that might not seem ideal right now, but will be better for everyone in the long run.
I love how it says, explain it to me like I'm an idiot, and we more or less said the same thing. So I'm glad that we are on par with explain to me like I'm an idiot.
we're sufficiently idiotic.
On brand, guy.
Yeah, on brand. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. Now, the interesting thing to think about, because I fundamentally believe we are all interconnected. That's where it ties into this Wolfram model with the hypergraphs, and we are just subgraphs within this larger graph. All of these things, and so we are all interconnected in some way, shape, or form, and we are all part of a greater whole, which is humanity, and we all play a role in that. And again, I don't think that as individuals, we have the full capacity to comprehend the totality of the whole, which is why I think Moloch arises so often and why it will always be a part to some regard. And again, it's the balancing between the Moloch and the Metatron. If that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense.
Yeah, because the whole is just so big. But there's a really interesting, I've got, I need to think of this point through a little bit. So if there's anything you want to say about it, go for it.
What I really, really like about what we've been talking about is that there needs to be a balance in between this good and bad. Like we've talked about this so many times. You've mentioned this so many times, right? That we need to stop saying like things are good or bad because these things sort of work together. And having a balance in between the Moloch and the Metatron is probably ideal. Probably just going through what percentage will be allocated to each one. What is that perfect balance? I think would be a great thing for humans to sort of try and strive for, because I think we're really going down Moloch, and if we could just get everybody on the same page, because here's the thing, if we support the family, if we support people, even the people at the top, even the people at the power will benefit from that. Even they will have a better life. You know, even they could find solutions to a lot of the problems that we have. Everybody would benefit from a better society. So it's very like short vision for people with a lot of power and money to sort of just think about themselves. Because if you invest in other people, if you make everyone around you rich, you become super rich. So it's just kind of like a really weird way of going at it. Power is such a powerful thing, like the greed. Greed is such a powerful emotion. And it's such a deadly one and a hurtful one because it affects so many people. It's like the worst kind of addiction to have. Really.
Yeah, greed is interesting, but it's very Molochy. More for you, more for you, more for you, because like that's sort of what you're saying. That's what that's your hill climbing. The more you can get, the better you're going to be off. The more you can get, the better you're going to be off. But that sort of comes at the cost of everyone else having less, so to speak, as opposed to So it's like trying to get the biggest piece of the pie you can, and by you getting more and more piece of the pie, it means that everybody else gets less and less of the pie, right? Whereas the Metatron is like, how can we grow the pie so that I've got this piece of the pie, but then if we grow the pie, then my piece gets bigger. Because the pie is bigger, right? I've still got the same share, but everyone's like the whole pie grows bigger, so then we all benefit. And that's sort of what you're saying is like, if we focus on that, we can all grow it. And that's honestly that's the struggle of society in my opinion. Really, it is. And I don't know if it's picking a specific ratio. I think it's a dynamic thing, and it's a constantly changing thing. And so what we can say at the moment is we're very Molochy. We've got a bit too much Molochy. We need to bring a bit more Metatron into that. And I fundamentally believe that comes through, education, belief systems, and what people hold to be true. And again, like that, zooming out a bit. But in order to zoom out and to be able to perceive the whole, you have to like, it's complex in that regard. Like you have to have a complexity to be able to sort of even conceptualize that. And the only way we can do that is through the education or through learning, through development, through developing the complexity within our own minds and our ability to handle and understand and comprehend complexity out there, right? And I'm a huge advocate of that education and developing one's belief systems and epistemologies, knowledge, acquiring more knowledge in that regard.
I'm forgetting the comedian's name. Oh, George Carlin. Just remembered it. He has a good bit about that.
Yeah,
about why the education system isn't getting better. Have you heard that?
Share it?
I can't do it, and I can't do it like him.
Come
So
on.
I'm not going to try and do it, but I can generally say what the point was. The point is that they really don't want to make the school systems better. They don't want you smarter. They don't want you better educated. They want to control you, and they want to make you stupid so you're easier to control. That was basically the bit.
There's a reason education sucks, and it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The big, the wealthy, the real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. They're irrelevant. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets, and they own all the big media news, all the big media companies. So they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right. You know something? They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they're getting fucked by a system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork, and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back, so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later, because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club.
You just said an interesting thing, and he says it too about the the elites or the powers that be. And Liv actually talks about that in that Lex Friedman podcast, where she's like, people often say like, it's the global elites that are doing this, or it's this group of people that are conspiring to enslave everybody and do this whole thing. And she makes a good point. And I think it's very true. I think it approximates the truth quite well. I don't think it's actually a group of these people. I think it's actually Moloch. It's actually Moloch that's doing it, and that the people are just caught up in these games, right? And so, but it's the manifestation of Moloch that's causing all of this. It isn't necessarily that there's specific people who are like trying to exploit everybody or trying to do all this kind of stuff. It's the realization of Moloch. It's because they're optimizing for the local, for them, trying to get as much as they can, that then leads to these sort of downstream things. But it's not necessarily a conscious thing that they're trying to make everyone silly or dumb or trying to enslave everybody, so to speak. I'm sure that does happen to some degree as well, but like, I thought that was a really good point that she made.
Yeah, I guess if we thought about it from a business standpoint, if you're in business and you're in a very competitive sort of business, and you know that other businesses are trying to take your market share because they're trying to grow their business, they're going to do certain things, make certain decisions in order to benefit themselves, which is going to decrease your income, decrease your investors, or it's going to affect your company in some ways. And like, I'm generally speaking about the larger companies, right? They're at a constant battle to try and gain more market share, and they do make certain decisions that affect a lot of people that sort of make the system worse. However, it benefits their business and it keeps them going and continuing to gain more market share. So it's not like they wanted to fuck the system. It's just simply they just wanted to keep their business alive.
And so we can tie this into sort of like that, again, with the Instagram beauty filter. If you're just using, I think that lots of these problems really arise, and the very Molochy things come from when we take very one-dimensional or very low-dimensional ways of approximating things. So with that business one, she gives an example of the businesses too. Like if you're just optimizing for like profit or KPIs, like certain key performance indicators, which is like how much profit are we making or how many products do we sell, etc. That's very one-dimensional, very low-dimensional. Okay, and then that's just like a guaranteed way to end up like Moloch, right? That's just how it happens. And so it's the same as when you define beauty by just this physical thing. You get caught in that trap as well, and it becomes a race to the bottom, right? The multipolar traps, etc. The whole Moloch thing. Whereas when you have a higher dimensional way of defining these things, it's harder to get caught in those traps, and it's more of a Metatron approach. And it's like, okay, no, what is beauty? And it's okay, it's not just the physical that can play a role in it, but it's actually the spiritual, the mental, the way the person conducts themselves. Like it's a multi-dimensional thing. And so then if we learn as a society how to define things in these higher dimensional ways, more complexity, then we can avoid a lot of the very simple Moloch traps, or a lot of the Moloch traps that we can avoid a lot of the Moloch that we've been getting caught up in. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a question, Rubes. The Wikipedia definition you sent me, I think I recall it saying it's from Greek mythology, Moloch.
Yeah, I think, I don't know the original of it, but it was like Hebrew, Greek. I think a bunch of religions have had these kinds of things. But it was a way for them to talk about things that were sort of present, but they didn't necessarily have a very specific language to talk about it. Like they only had the language that they had and the level of understanding that they had at that time, or the models that they had at that time. And so it turned into these sorts of stories about these like gods, these things that did this stuff. It's actually a really good segue into mythology and how important and why it's valuable it is. Well, people have been aware of these kinds of things for a very long time, but we only had the language that we had back then to describe them and talk about them. So it ended up, we discussed them in these ways like gods and demons and the good and the bad, like all of that kind of stuff. And so now, as we've developed, more mathematical frameworks, you've got category theory, which can be described as the mathematics of mathematics, or and it's like a decent framework for multi-computation or how things compose. We've got all these other frameworks, so now we can start to sort of understand it. Oh, okay, these are these things that present themselves when you have all of these different moving parts or these different agents in an environment competing over a resource or any number of different things, but it's the dynamics of life, really. And that these are these inevitable things that seem to arise. And so previously we talked about them as gods and used mythology to communicate these concepts because we didn't necessarily have other ways that were easily digestible by many people. Yeah. And so that's what I like. And we've discussed this about religion and everything else. Like when people refer to God, I think God is the universe. But God, as it's described in religions, is like, no, God's this, they're sort of anthropomorphized. They God's a guy, lives up in the sky, and so I think that was used because, well, how else were people back in the day meant to understand that? And I think that speaks to that point about the reason why this is sort of an ongoing thing, and I think will be for a decent period of time, is because each individual in that system doesn't necessarily have the ability or the complexity present within their mind or the capacity. You are just one mind in a greater organism that is the sum total of all of these minds. And then more than that, it's all of the other interactions as well. How can you as one person perceive the whole? It's like, we are computationally bounded in that regard, but we can come up with concepts and ways to sort of compress the idea of the whole and then hold it in our own mind. And I think previously that compression technique was through mythology and gods.
Do you think there ever was a society that were sacrificing children in order to gain something? Do you think that Greek mythology was written about stories that were passed down, or some sort of lost knowledge, or of that matter? Or do you think that it was just a way to teach people not to be so hardcore Moloch, and they sort of used a story so horrific to sort of teach people about it?
Yes, I think it definitely would have happened. And it actually does happen now in 2023. So there are tribes in certain African countries, I believe. Yes, African countries. That's what I'm aware of. There could be others. But they still will sacrifice children before they go into battle. So I can find the specifics of it, but what I've read and watched a mini documentary on this completely challenged my worldview and what I thought was real or possible in our world. But yeah, this happens now. So they will get a child or children from the community or from another tribe or another village, steal them or whatever as a sacrifice. The leader of the tribe or the army or whoever's going into battle will then get the child, kill them. So either like slit their throat or slice them down the back, and then he'll take out the heart and he'll eat a bit of the heart, and then they feed the blood to the army members, and then parts of the child, like organs and different things. And they'll do this before they go into battle, and they believe that it gives them these supernatural, superhuman strengths and this ability and this courage. And so, whether or not that's true in a sense, I don't know. But as we know about the placebo effect, the placebo effect is really quite effective. So whether it actually does have some benefit, or if it's just that they believe that it has a benefit and it actually gives them this courage and whatever else, but they do it because for them over time it has worked. And so they're continuing to do it, and they believe that it works. And so that's, yeah. But yeah, I can imagine if it's happening now, then I can imagine it happening throughout history. There's also another weird segue we can either go down or avoid, which is like this, these stories about elites eating kids or drinking blood or like all that other crazy stuff to maintain their youth and vitality and different things like that. And there is an interesting startup that was in California in America where young virile people could go and donate blood, and then if you had enough money you could pay to have that blood transfused into your body. And there's a whole thing with NAD plus and different things in the blood that younger people have higher levels of than older people, and so there's a whole sciencey thing behind that. But yeah, feel free to take whatever you want from there, Guy. That was a lot.
No, Guy, remember I'm blazed, so I'm like, those two stories hit me hard, bro. I wasn't aware that there were still African tribes doing that, or any tribes in the world at all doing that. Obviously I've heard of some horrific things, but that's up there for sure. I wasn't aware of that. The blood thing, yeah, I've heard some weird stories about that as well. I guess it's ignorant of me to think that we have developed as a society completely, because it's still going on, and probably has always been going on. We don't really learn from history. We're not very good at, people like read history, study history, but we don't learn from it really as a whole. I feel like in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, definitely we do, and different groups of people, different geographies will learn at different rates. And that's essentially, yeah. And because it's all at different rates, and then tied into the, short-term local optimization versus the long-term global and all of those trade-offs, the Moloch and the Metatron and everything else. That's why it's sort of it is harder to learn from history. Yeah, because we only have our present in the now, and that's what we try and optimize for. And as much knowledge as there is in history that we could look back on and gain from, a lot of the time we might not want to apply it because locally in the moment we're just trying to optimize for us in the moment, in that local, as opposed to zooming out and realizing that we're actually part of a larger organism that is humanity, or a larger system that is humanity. But for all of us, our experience is very real to us. That's all we know. And so we are these single parts that actually are part of a larger system. But then again, because we are just one part of that larger system, it's very hard to conceptualize the whole system. And that's why I think there's this bit of a trade-off. But I think this is built into so many things in existence or life. And so, yeah.
So let's go Metatron, dude. Let's go, not full Metatron, but let's try and be more Metatron out there. You know what I mean? We should all try and look at ourselves and try and be a little bit more Metatron each day. Find a balance between Metatron, Moloch, and optimize this world, make it better for everyone. I have faith that we can do it, Rubes.
Well, okay, so I just gotta go. I don't know if it's optimize. I feel like the optimize is the Moloch trap guy,
right?
So it's balance between the Moloch and Metatron.
Optimizing balance guy. Optimizing balance. No, you mentioned that it's a fluid thing. The balance has to be fluid. It needs to move. It needs to be. It can't be fixed.
Dynamic.
Dynamic. That's it.
Correct. Yeah. Fixed point is death. Fixed point is not good. Okay. So tying this all together, the last pod we did was that easy decisions, hard life, hard decisions, easy life. And I think that's another way of framing Metatron versus Moloch, or Moloch versus Metatron. Okay. So went through that already. And so that's what we all can sort of do is okay, so what are the hard decisions we can make in the moment that will lead to these greater payoffs? And that's a very Metatron approach. And so I think that's a very actionable sort of thing that we can all sort of do. I know I'm trying to do that. We rock up every week to film this pod, but not because we're making money from it or doing anything else. It's because I genuinely am interested in these kinds of things. You're genuinely interested in that kind of stuff. And we found that we have these conversations offline, or we used to have them largely offline. And it's well, I'm interested in this, and there are people who talk about this, but also we have a unique perspective because we're idiots. And so we sort of lower the barrier a little bit in some way, shape, or form. So that's why we have these conversations, and we film it because maybe there's a chance that someone else listens to this and becomes aware of a concept that they sort of thought about, but didn't really know how to put it together, or any number of different things. But that's one way. I mean, this is a hard, we're sacrificing our time and energy to come and chat about this stuff each week, and there's no clear payoff for any of it. And I think that's a bit more of a Metatron approach too. And so that's why I like doing these kinds of things and want to do more of that kind of stuff. But then beyond that, we can all do that with ourselves. Again, learning how to do that harder thing in the moment for the long term. And that's definitely taking into account the whole. And if we do that with our own lives, I think that's a great way to contribute to the collective doing that, if that makes sense. You can't just expect the collective to shift, but if we start to shift ourselves from a more Moloch to a more Metatron approach in that regard, then as each individual becomes a bit more Metatron, then the collective becomes more Metatron.
We have to optimize dynamic balance. Just adding to it now. Just adding to it now.
Yeah, are you willing to die on that hill? Or are you just I'm not taking my optimization back. I'm going to find a way to word this so that I was right.
Yeah, no, but sorry guys. Sorry, I fucked it up. You said it really nicely, and I just ended it with what the fuck, guy. Yeah. After all
that's good. That's very on brand, guy. Very on brand.
Yeah. Oh, what water is that? That looks like a European style bottle.
It's Italian?
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, it definitely has a European style to it.
Yeah, I'm highly hydrated today, guy. Okay, so with all of this, is there any like clarifying points or anything else you wanted to sort of quickly run over? We could finish it off on a any note you want, really.
I think that was fabulous, Guy. I really had fun on this one, dude. I think this is one of our best ones.
Okay. Fuck yeah. And we can just we'll sum it up. So one big part of that is realizing that you don't exist in isolation. No one person exists in isolation at all. We're all part of a greater whole, and we all exist in a greater ecosystem or a greater system, and that we are all connected in some way, shape, or form. And if you think of the universe as a giant hypergraph with all these subgraphs interconnected and tangling, you realize how interconnected it is. And then if you also realize that what makes a graph is the connections between the nodes, and if you think of yourself as, at a different level of abstraction as a node, well, what makes you is your connection to every other node or all the other nodes that you are connected to. Okay. So that shows the interconnectedness of it all. And by thinking about it in that way, you can help yourself to start to take a more Metatron approach to things and realize that the actions and the things that you do don't exist in an isolation. They exist as part of of a greater whole. And that although some of those things might feel like a sacrifice or not optimal in the moment, doesn't mean that it isn't. And that sometimes you can't know ahead of time if it is or isn't, and you just have to cross that valley. And that's a very Metatron approach. So hopefully that clarifies a few things.
Yo, thanks for bringing it back, Guy. You turned that ship right back on point on Idiot Ocean. Well done, Guy.
I enjoy that. I enjoy trying to bring it back. It's a good challenge.
Yeah. All right, bro. So I'll see you next week. Oh, shit.
Indeed, guys. What?
I forgot to tell everyone that they need to subscribe. I'm so blazed. I'm forgetting. Please subscribe to the channel.
Okay, so yeah. Or don't subscribe. Try some reverse psychology. Don't subscribe.
Yeah. Don't
even watch the videos.
Don't share the videos. Don't comment on the video.
Yeah.
We don't want any comments.
Definitely don't like the video. Okay. Definitely don't like the video. Definitely don't share it. Definitely don't watch the video. But if you do, then share it with people who you like or love or might find it valuable, or even people you don't like, just to piss them off at how stupid we are. That would be a really good use case. I'm going to do that actually. Also, if you have any comments or questions, or if I fucked anything up, or we got anything wrong, let us know, because we are idiots and we're open to being we're wrong about lots of stuff. So let us know in the comments, talk shit, fuck around and find out. Have fun. See you next week with another great installment of Idiots Squared.
All right. Peace, bro. Love you, dude.
Peace.